Tree ID video. This is a jack pine, and I can tell it is a jack pine because I know it has needles if I look up in the canopy, which I will get to in a second. I'm gonna have to superimpose that because I haven't found any, or superimpose my voice over some images because I haven't found a good sample of needles yet. But again, we can see the bark is very flaky. Please do not mistake this for black cherry bark. Just look up, you'll find out that it has needles and not leaves. One of the other very, very distinctive things, and one of the great ways I've said it before about differentiating conifers, is the cones, which I have right here. And jack pine does have very distinctive cones. These ones actually aren't necessarily so great, but they kind of make my point. So this is a jack pine cone, and as we can see, it has kind of a weird shape. First of all, you'll notice these things look really, really tight, and the bracts look, or the scales rather, look very, very tight. But also, jack pine has this weird cone shape. This one doesn't exemplify it so well, but I'll find an example that does. They kind of look like shrimp, and you can see already this thing has a bit of a curve to it, if my phone will ever focus. There you go. It has a little bit of a curve to it, and the classic association that you make for jack pine is they look kind of shrimp-like. Again, this one isn't as curved, but a lot of the time they curl around the twig, and once again, I will find an example that's a little bit better than this. But if you look up in the canopy, you can see cones that are a little bit curled or a little bit curled around the twig, and that is one great way you can figure out jack pine from anything else. As I'm talking, and I will dub this over, jack pine has needles in bunches of 2. They're kind of short, about the size of Scots pine needles, that is to say about 1 inch to 2 inches long. And the thing with jack pine needles is they spread out. So they kind of start from the twig and they spread out in a V. Again, I'll find a picture to make this a little bit better of an image for you, but that's one of the distinctive features of jack pine. So again, bark that looks a little bit like this, flaky, but do not mistake it for black cherry. Cones that are a little bit shrimp shaped, and needles in bunches of 2 that splay outwards from each other in the shape of a V. Just another quick note about jack pine needles I forgot to mention here. One of the key characteristics, or I mean a characteristic that can help you differentiate between them and other dual needled species, is that jack pine needles diverge from each other. So again, this is a bunch of jack pine. There's 2 needles in one bunch, and each needle kind of forms a V and gets farther apart the further away from the bunch that you go, as you can kind of see here. Red pine, Austrian pine, Scots pine. I don't think any of the other pine species actually diverge quite as much as jack pine, so that is another little ID species or ID feature that you can use. Obviously, that will not be present, or that will not necessarily be obvious on each one of the needles, so try and make a little bit of a bigger sample size. Don't just look at one bunch and say, oh, okay, that's, they don't diverge, therefore it's not a jack pine. Look around the tree a little bit more and see if you can find a bunch of needles that diverge. So jack pine, 2 needles per bunch, and needles that diverge from the base.